the candle gutters, and something in you knows the room is not empty. A windless flicker crawls up the flame, as if an unseen mouth has just exhaled. You lean closer to the vellum. It is warm. In the year 1541, when fire was the method by which authorities purified the world of inconvenient books, a Benedictine brother pried up a stone at the back of his monastery cell and slid a manuscript into the wall. He sealed it with prayer and mortar, believing he had pressed a heart into hibernation. Centuries later, dust would concede the secret. A thin hand would reach into that cavity and pull out a confession signed with a name already half-legend. Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, whom the tongues of Europe had reduced to a single spark of a word. Paracelsus. The first page was not a treatise. It was a warning. The Latin margin carried a scrawl that looked as if it had been written in haste and wiped once with a wet thumb. Loosely rendered, it said, "Knowledge does not promise which hand it will serve. Purity is the only surgeon who may touch it." The librarian who lifted the document into the light lasted 7 days. No tribunal came for him, no obvious enemy. He simply failed, like a candle in a room without oxygen. But before he fell, he copied enough to ensure the manuscript would outlive him. What lay bound between those covers was neither an apothecary's ledger, nor the kind of scholastic disputation that wins chairs and enemies. It was a map of 12 passages through illness into meaning, not anecdotes, but confessions, not spells, but instructions for remembering a power the era had forgotten to name. It promised something no tincture could guarantee, that the soul, properly addressed, could lead the body back from places where physicians no longer knock. Paracelsus never belonged to one city. He moved the way weather moves, through Basel and Strasbourg, through valleys whose names the archives spelt in 5 different ways. He was accused of arrogance, of heresy, of burning books not because he hated them, but because he hated the way men worshipped them. He was a physician who spoke like a mystic, and an alchemist who scolded alchemists for loving metals more than meanings. He carried in his coat an anatomy of the seen and the unseen, and he believed both bled red. This first confession begins not in a theater of surgery, but in a winter room that smelled of wool and ashes. A woman was led in, face veiled. When she lifted the cloth, the room flinched. Open sores, bordered as if by frostbite, heckled the physician's pride. The city's learned men had pronounced their Latin and shrugged. They called it humor gone rogue. They bled her. They blistered her. They prescribed rest and prayers coughed up like coins. Nothing changed. Paracelsus did not reach for a jar. He asked for her story. He watched her hands answer before her mouth did, the knuckles whitening with every mention of a husband whose shadow entered the room a heartbeat before he did. The physician noted what no one else had measured. The timing. Each eruption of the skin after each eruption of rage at home. He had a name for the tissue that mediates between what we think and what we touch. The subtle body, the astral garment, whatever metaphor your century permits. In his language, it was the place where weather begins. Storms started there and later arrived at the flesh as hail. He did not ask her to adore her illness. He asked her to interrogate it. Each morning she was to lay her hands on her heart and read the day's first silence. Not to beg for removal, but to ask, "What are you trying to say that I refuse to hear?" He taught her to listen with the same attention with which a hunter listens for a twig. For 30 mornings, she addressed her sores as letters she had neglected to open. On the 31st, she made a decision that was not medical, and therefore was. She left the house where fear had been her weather. Within a week, the skin that had shouted grew quiet. The veil was no longer a bandage. It could return to being simply a garment. From this, the first key. The body is an honest journal kept by a soul that refuses to write in lies. It does not punish, it publishes. Pain is not a judge's gavel. It is a messenger's knock. We are trained to crush the envelope because the contents embarrass us. We call it random. We say, it runs in the family. We attend the funeral of responsibility, and then wonder why resurrection is rare. Paracelsus did not deny bile, or blood, or blackened lung. He wrote, instead, that the visible is a late chapter. Illness is composed in the subtler pages first, where grief edits sleep, where anger salts the bloodstream, where shame bends posture so gently you call it habit. By the time symptoms arrive, they are translations. If you only correct the translation, the author continues to write the same book. He learned to read in both directions. When fever rose, he asked not only what microbe, but what heat of mind. When an ulcer insisted on its mouth in the skin, he asked, what speech has been swallowed so long it protests by opening elsewhere? This is not metaphor as analgesic. It is grammar. We are written beings. We are also the author who can amend. You can perform a simple liturgy, if you dare. Before the world's first noise enters your room, before messages bite and headlines busy your jaw, place both palms over your chest and count 3 true breaths. Not the shallow survival gasps we call breathing, but 3 descents of air all the way to the root. Ask without ceremony, what balance have I mislaid? What truth is trying to speak through bone? Then keep the promise most prayers break. Listen. The dangerous part of this key is not its poetry, but its demand. If the body mirrors the soul, then treatment is not only the pill, but the decision, the boundary you draw, the apology you give, the grief you finally carry to the river, instead of to your neighbor's door. It is easier to argue about mechanisms than to leave a room where your cells lose their courage. Easier to talk than to breathe. Easier to stigmatize a symptom than to bless its message and act. Paracelsus never wrote that herbs are useless. He compounded them, and sometimes they were righteous thunder. He only insisted they be delivered to the correct address. If the wound is written in the subtle body, a salve applied to skin is a letter placed at the wrong door. The messenger will circle the block and knock again until someone answers from the inside. There is a line in the manuscript, ink faded, meaning sharp. What you call disease, I call a confession that has not yet been heard under oath. He meant, take yourself seriously enough to testify. Do not perform sorrow at dinner and expect your liver to remain a neutral witness. Do not conceal fury and expect your blood to circulate it out of existence. The body does not collude. It reveals. If this sounds like accusation, hear it again. It is an absolution. If the soul can injure the body by neglect, it can mend it by attention. The distance between the two is not tragic. It is navigable. The route begins in small rituals timed to the hour when you still remember what silence feels like. Honor the messenger. Do not shoot it. Seat it. Ask better questions. Promise to obey the answers you already know. Tonight, before you turn off the last light, make a covenant with the page you are. Take one symptom, headache, jaw tightness, insomnia's bright coins, and write a single sentence to it as if to a person you owe. In the morning, put your hands where your guard usually stands and say aloud, softly enough not to wake the house, I am listening. Say it twice if you have lied before. The flames of that century believed truth is a crime when it frees the wrong captives. Perhaps they were right to fear a manuscript that begins like this, for if you accept the first key, you can no longer pretend you are a victim of pure accident. You are a steward of weather. You can alter the climate of a life by changing the sky in which your body stands. You have opened the wall and touched the warm page. The next leaf speaks of wounds that have not yet learned how to touch skin, and of how to notice them before they announce themselves in blood. The question is not whether they exist. It is whether you will look where mirrors have no glass. Are you ready to read what the air around your throat is already writing? The night holds its breath before dawn. If you listen carefully, the silence is not empty. It is charged, as though the air itself is holding a secret just beyond the edge of hearing. In this pause between dark and light lies the threshold Paracelsus called the invisible wound. He wrote, "The wise physician sees the disease before the body knows it exists, for the soul whispers long before the flesh cries out." To him, this was not a metaphor. It was practice, a skill sharpened through observation and peril. And like all dangerous gifts, it arrived disguised as ordinary life. It was the summer of 1527, in Basel. A prosperous merchant stepped into Paracelsus's chamber with no complaint, no fever, no pain. He requested only a tonic to preserve his strength for journeys across Europe. By the calendar of medicine, he was healthy. By the gaze of Paracelsus, he was not. Around the man's throat hovered something subtle, a shadow not cast by candlelight, but by silence. His voice carried strain he could not hear himself. His eyes flickered with the restlessness of a secret pressed down too long. The physician asked a question that startled the room into stillness. What truth lives in your throat that you have never allowed to breathe? The merchant paled, as though someone had unlatched a door he had forgotten existed. Then, haltingly, he confessed. For years he had hidden the fact that he could not read or write, maintaining a mask before partners, children, and even his own conscience. Shame had welded his silence shut. The unspoken words had begun to rot within, and Paracelsus knew what others could not yet see, that such repression would soon solidify into disease. The wound was already there. The body had only not yet written it in flesh. Here lies the second key. Before an illness writes itself on the body, it first scribbles warnings in the soul's invisible ledger. Traumas repressed, lies sustained, emotions silenced. All of them leave scars in the subtle fabric of our being. In the language of modern science, we might call it stress pathways, psychosomatic imprint, cellular memory. In the language of mystics, it is the etheric body, the luminous web that holds every bruise of spirit until it is acknowledged or transmuted. Ignore it, and the body will eventually act it out with surgical clarity. But Paracelsus did not stop at diagnosis. He offered a discipline, a ritual as precise as any scalpel. He named it the scrutiny of the soul. Each evening, as the sun slid beneath the horizon, he instructed his students to enter silence. Close the eyes. Imagine the body as if made of glass, suffused with golden light. Then travel inward, region by region, crown of the head, brow, throat, chest, belly, limbs. At each station inquire, "What pain do you carry for me? What truth have I feared to see? What emotion sleeps here, waiting for release?" Do not expect answers in words. Sometimes the reply arrives as heaviness in the stomach, or a chill at the back of the neck, or a sudden ache beneath the ribs. These sensations, he said, are the soul's handwriting. The task is not to erase them, but to honor them, to breathe into them not with resistance but with recognition. Often the cure is simple yet formidable: expression, confession, forgiveness, or merely the act of being seen at last. The merchant obeyed. For 3 months he sat each dusk in scrutiny, peeling back his shame like old parchment. At last he dared to reveal his secret to his family, to admit his ignorance, and begin again as a student of letters rather than a pretender of mastery. What happened next was no less than transformation. The shadow at his throat dissolved, the threatened illness never took root, and his business prospered more than before, because his life no longer bled vitality to maintain a lie. Perhaps you hear in this only the echo of psychology. But remember, psychology is only the newest mask of something older. Ancient Egyptian healers taught a parallel ritual, envisioning the body of light and interrogating its fractures before they hardened into matter. The Hebrews had their cheshbon ha-nefesh, the accounting of the soul. Buddhists practiced vipassana, scanning sensations across the body to reveal the truth beneath them. All roads converge on this. If you can see the wound before it cuts, you can choose to heal without blood. And so I ask you, when was the last time you scanned yourself not for beauty or for flaws, but for truth? When was the last time you sat in silence long enough to notice the tremor in your jaw, the weight in your chest, the tight rope of muscles coiled across your back? These are not nuisances to be stretched away. They are telegrams. They are early warnings, offered with patience until patience runs out. Tonight you might try it. Sit at sunset, alone. Close your eyes and become transparent. See yourself as light. Begin at the crown. Ask quietly, what lives here? Move downward part by part. Do not argue, do not rationalize, listen. Some answers will sting. Some will arrive as tears you thought you had already shed. Some will be nothing but silence, which is sometimes the soul's most eloquent reply. The key is not to fight. When a wound appears, breathe into it as though you are bowing to a guest. Ask, what do you need from me to be healed? Sometimes it will ask for honesty, sometimes for release, sometimes for nothing more than recognition. If you practice this long enough, you may discover that entire illnesses can be averted, that storms disperse while still clouds, that the wound never needs to scar the flesh because it was already welcomed in the spirit. Paracelsus warned, "He who waits for disease to declare itself in the body has already lost half the battle. He who listens earlier fights with time as ally. In our world of constant distraction, we are trained to wait until symptoms scream. But the soul always whispers first. The question is whether you are willing to live in a silence deep enough to hear it. This is the second key, to honor the invisible wound before it becomes visible. And if you can learn to read what the air writes on your skin, then you may never need to read it carved into your bones. The next secret will go further still, for it is not enough to detect wounds. You must also learn how to purge them before they fester. Prepare yourself, for Paracelsus called this art the fasting of the spirit, a cleansing more radical than any known medicine. The mountains do not forgive illusions. They strip a man to his marrow, leaving only what he truly is. In the winter of 1528, Paracelsus wandered into the cold embrace of the Alps, an exile from Basel, declared heretic by the universities that had once tolerated his brilliance. Alone in a wooden hut, sustained only by roots and water, he stumbled upon a secret not written in any pharmacopoeia: the fasting of the spirit. At first he believed he was simply enduring hunger, but soon he realized that abstinence from food was the least of his challenges. Even as his stomach emptied, his mind gorged itself, on bitterness toward his accusers, on fears of obscurity, on memories of every failure. He discovered that the soul can intoxicate itself more lethally than the body, and unlike wine or poison, these toxins had no scent, no taste, no vial to cast aside. They lived within him. He wrote, The soul may be more diseased than the flesh, and its fevers more fatal. One can starve the body of bread and yet feed the heart with rancor until it rots. This revelation turned exile into initiation. For 7 days, Paracelsus undertook a second fast, not of the mouth, but of the mind. He denied himself the luxury of resentment. Each time a thought of revenge surfaced, he named it and released it like a stone into snow. Each surge of fear he watched until it dissolved in the cold air. Each memory of humiliation he refused to chew like spoiled meat. Instead, he fed himself on silence, on the whiteness of the mountains, on the bare rhythm of his own breath. The effect was terrifying, then miraculous. On the 3rd day he broke, not with vomit, but with sobs. Decades of buried grief and shame poured out as though his soul itself were vomiting. He wept until he trembled, screamed until the trees echoed back, and then lay emptied as if newly born. By the 7th day, he felt lighter than he had ever known. His back pain, long a companion, was gone. His breath was deep, clear, unburdened. His eyes saw with acuity he had never trusted before. He claimed that afterward he could diagnose sickness in others with a glance, not by analysis, but by resonance. His perception had been scrubbed clean. This, he declared, was the ayuno del espiritu, the fasting of the spirit. Just as the body is cleansed by abstaining from corrupt foods, the soul is cleansed by refusing to feed on its own poisons. Consider, how often do we swallow anger and chew it for years? How often do we replay humiliations like a broken record, turning them into invisible meals? We wonder why illness arises, yet the body is only reflecting the banquet of toxins the soul insists on consuming. The ancients knew fragments of this truth. The desert fathers of Christianity fled to caves to starve both belly and thought. The Buddhists speak of detachment from kleshas, the afflictions of mind. In Ayurveda, fasting is prescribed not merely to rest the stomach, but to allow the subtle body to burn impurities. Paracelsus gathered all these whispers into one thunderous proclamation. Purification of the soul is the medicine behind every medicine. He warned, though, that the practice was not for the faint of heart. To abstain from food is one matter. To abstain from vengeance, self-pity, or envy is another. The body rebels for a day and then quiets. The mind rebels endlessly, clawing for attention, conjuring memories to lure you back into bondage. Yet if you endure, the reward is indescribable. He outlined a method, deceptively simple. Begin with 3 days. Refrain not only from heavy foods, but also from feeding toxic thoughts. Drink only water, broths, and light herbal infusions. Each morning declare aloud, "My soul fasts from poison. I accept only love, gratitude, and healing." When resentment or fear arises, do not battle it. Watch it drift by like smoke until it disperses. Say, "I do not feed you." Replace consumption with contemplation. Walk in silence. Gaze upon light. Practice prayer or meditation, not to ask for favors, but to align with the purity you are reclaiming. On the 2nd day, expect turmoil. The soul expels what it has hoarded. You may feel sadness with no cause, rage with no target, terror with no object. This is the vomit of the spirit. Let it come. Welcome it as a cleansing storm. By the 3rd day, if you endure, lightness dawns. A serenity unknown begins to replace the chaos. Paracelsus believed that many so-called incurable diseases melted after such purgation, not because the herbs lost their power, but because the soil was finally clean enough to receive them. A purified soul, he said, makes the body porous to grace. And here lies the challenge to you, listener. What would happen if you chose, for just 3 days, to fast not only from food, but from complaint, from envy, from despair. What would your body do if your soul no longer served it poison at every meal? The fasting of the spirit is not escape. It is confrontation, the confrontation with the darkest cupboard of the self, and the courage to throw away the rot. But those who dare emerge not weakened, but radiant. This was Paracelsus's third key: cleanse the soul, and the body will remember its perfection. But he did not stop here. For after the fast, there is breath, the bridge between soul and flesh, the golden thread of life. In the next secret, Paracelsus would reveal how the simple act of breathing could become the most powerful sacrament of healing. Between inhalation and exhalation, there is a pause so subtle most of us never notice it. Paracelsus called this pause the golden bridge, the sacred instant where the soul brushes against the body and imprints its hidden music. To him, breath was not mere oxygen. It was the sacred thread that stitched heaven to flesh. It was autumn of 1529 in Salzburg when this truth struck him with the force of revelation. An elderly peasant woman was carried to his quarters, coughing, lungs collapsing under the weight of a sickness physicians had already declared terminal. Her body was frail, yes, but what Paracelsus observed was stranger. Each breath she drew was jagged, chaotic, as though her soul itself was drowning. Her exhalations were sighs of despair rather than currents of life. The disease was not only in her lungs, it was in the very relationship her spirit had with breathing. Paracelsus recalled the Hermetic texts he had studied, the whispered lore of ancient initiates who guarded breath as their most sacred key. Among yogis of the East, it was prana. Among Stoics, it was pneuma. Among Hebrew mystics, it was the ruach, all different tongues describing the same invisible force, the breath that carries divine life. He realized that the quality of one's breathing was the quality of one's healing. That night, he knelt by the peasant woman's bed and guided her through a practice that would later be called the contemplative breath of the soul. He instructed her to place one hand on her chest, another on her belly, to close her eyes, and to imagine each inhalation as light descending from heaven. With each gentle pause, she was to silently affirm, "This light heals my body, my mind, my soul." With each exhalation, she was to release smoke, fear, sorrow, memories too heavy for her fragile frame. The exercise was deceptively simple, yet after weeks of practice, her lungs cleared, the coughing subsided. She lived not one more month as expected, but 15 more years, vibrant and lucid. From this miracle, Paracelsus forged his fourth key. Breath is the medicine of the soul. He taught that each inhalation is more than air. It is spirit itself descending into matter, charging every cell with vitality. Each exhalation is more than waste. It is the soul's chance to discard burdens, griefs, and shadows that suffocate health. He warned, however, that most people breathe as prisoners. We drag in air shallowly, starved of vitality, then cast it out without awareness. We live in constant suffocation, unaware that our first sacrament is performed every moment. True healing requires awakening the breath, turning it from reflex into ritual. He prescribed a simple practice. At dawn and dusk, sit facing the rising or setting sun in silence. Place your right hand upon your heart, the left upon your belly. Inhale slowly, visualizing golden light descending into your chest, filling every tissue with warmth. Pause for 3 heartbeats and inwardly declare, "This light restores harmony." Exhale gently, releasing smoke-like shadows of fear, pain, and memory. Watch them dissolve into the air. Repeat 7 cycles, 7 being the number of completion in both heaven and earth. Done daily, he promised, this practice could regenerate organs, calm fevers, even sharpen perception beyond the ordinary. And indeed, he recorded case after case of ailments lifting, not by external medicine, but by teaching patients to breathe in light and exhale darkness. Modern science, though centuries late, has begun to catch a glimpse of what he knew. Deep conscious breathing alters the nervous system, slows the heart, heals inflammation, steadies the mind. But Paracelsus would say that these are only shadows of the true mystery. The real power of the breath is communion with the divine. For when you breathe consciously, you are not only sustaining life, you are praying with your body. Each breath becomes a liturgy, an unspoken hymn, a constant reminder that you are never severed from the source. Breath is the rope that holds you in the storm, the string of light tethering the soul to its mortal vessel. So I ask you, listener, how are you breathing? Are you inhaling fear or light? Are you exhaling bitterness or release? To breathe consciously is to decide, moment by moment, which world you will live in, the world of suffocation or the world of sanctity. This is the fourth confession. The soul heals the body through the breath. It is not an idea to admire, but a discipline to live. And yet, Paracelsus warned, even breath requires a vessel to carry its charge. The vessel, humble and omnipresent, is water, the liquid memory of the cosmos. In the next secret, he unveils the forgotten rite of consecrated water, where the healer imprints divine vibrations into the simplest of elements. Water, the most common element on earth, and yet the most mysterious. To Paracelsus, it was not merely H2O, no more than a cathedral is only stone. He called it the living mirror, the liquid that remembers. It was the summer of 1530 in the forests of Carinthia, when this truth arrived clothed in wonder. A boy of 8 lay burning with fever, his parents frantic after every known remedy had failed. Beside his bed, the grandmother had placed a wooden bowl filled with spring water. Paracelsus noticed something uncanny. When the child's fever rose, the water turned cloudy as if burdened with sorrow. When the boy found a brief calm, the liquid grew clear again. The bowl seemed to be breathing with him, reflecting the state of his soul. In that moment, Paracelsus understood. Water does not simply quench thirst. It receives, holds, and transmits vibrations. Just as crystal resonates with sound, water resonates with spirit. Every drop is an archive, storing the hidden frequencies of thought and emotion. To the natural philosophers of his time, this was heresy, but to him, it was revelation. That night, he took a vessel of pure spring water and performed what he would later call the consecration of water. He did not add herbs, nor stir powders. Instead, he cradled the bowl between his hands, breathed deeply, and directed every thought of compassion, every memory of harmony, every spark of divine intention into the liquid. He visualized light streaming through his breath into the molecules. He whispered prayers, not as incantations, but as confessions of his own heart. Be health, be balance, be life. When the ritual ended, the water shimmered with a subtle glow, perceptible only to eyes trained in devotion. He gave the child 3 sips. Within hours, the fever broke. By dawn, the boy was laughing in the yard. Paracelsus concluded, water is the soul's courier. It can carry blessing or curse, purity or poison, depending on the intention infused into it. To drink consecrated water is to drink memory itself, the memory of wholeness. He devised a discipline for his students. Before the ritual, purify. Fast lightly for half a day, cleanse your body, wear clean garments. Choose pure water, spring water if possible, or at least water that has been stilled in glass, away from noise and corruption. Hold the vessel without touching the liquid, palms open around it as if protecting a flame. Enter the contemplative breath, inhaling light, exhaling shadow, until the mind is calm. For 10 minutes, fill the water with love alone. Let your chest expand with compassion and feel it pouring through your hands. For 10 more minutes, imagine perfect health, organs restored, cells glowing, balance returned. Picture this health etching itself into the water. For the final 10 minutes, lift your heart to the divine as you understand it, asking only that the water serve as an instrument of grace. At the end, drink 3 sips yourself, affirming aloud, "This water carries the memory of wholeness." Then give it to the one in need. Store the rest in dark glass, where its power remains for 7 days. Modern minds may recall the controversial experiments of Masaru Emoto, photographing crystals of water exposed to words of love or hate. Science debates the data, yet the intuition remains eternal. Water responds. Across cultures, holy water has been sprinkled, blessed, and revered. Paracelsus simply lifted this hidden ritual into a medical art, declaring that water is the bridge between thought and flesh. But he issued a warning. The vessel amplifies the vessel. If a healer's heart is pure, the water heals. If the heart is corrupted, the water poisons. For water never lies. It carries exactly what it receives. Pause and reflect. How many glasses have you drunk today without blessing them? What vibrations have you poured into your own bloodstream unconsciously? Each sip could be a sacrament, if only you would remember. This is the 5th confession. To consecrate water is to consecrate the body that drinks it. Every stream, every cup, every raindrop holds the possibility of being medicine. Yet Paracelsus knew that even water cannot act alone. For healing to become miraculous, the healer must surrender entirely, not just technique, but ego itself. And so, the next secret leads into the most perilous vow of all, the pact with light, where the physician ceases to be master and becomes instrument. Light is older than words. Before scripture, before medicine, before the first fire was struck from stone, light was the first healer. Paracelsus knew this, but he learned it not in books. He learned it through surrender. It was the spring of 1531, in an abandoned monastery near Villach. He had fled again, pursued by accusations of arrogance and heresy. Exhausted, hungry, and heavy with despair, he collapsed in the ruin of a chapel. For 3 days he neither ate nor drank. He questioned everything, his remedies, his visions, even the worth of his life. Why did some healings succeed and others fail, even when his technique was flawless? Why did miracles descend in one case and abandon him in another? On the 3rd night, as a storm broke outside, clarity struck him like lightning. Healing is not born of the physician's will. It is born when the healer ceases to impose and allows the divine to flow. His greatest cures had never been his own doing. They had come in moments of humility, when he disappeared, and something greater acted through him. In the ruins of that chapel, Paracelsus performed no ritual of herbs or fire. He lit a single candle, placed it at the level of his heart, and spoke aloud 3 renunciations. I renounce my will, so that the divine will may move through me. I renounce my pride, so that wisdom may flow unimpeded. I renounce my need for recognition, so that love may heal without limits. As he spoke, he felt a current descend through his crown, flooding every nerve with golden brilliance. He trembled, not with fear, but with awe. He later wrote that it was as though the air itself had turned to light, and that from that night forward, his very presence carried a new radiance. Patients who once resisted treatment began to heal simply by being near him. His diagnoses came not by study but by revelation. His hands moved with intuition more precise than knowledge. This was the sixth key, the pact with light. It is not a technique, but a vow, a surrender of ego so complete that the healer becomes a transparent channel for the intelligence of creation. He taught his disciples how to perform their own pact. Choose a night of the new moon, symbol of beginnings. Fast the day before, cleansing both body and thought. Bathe and clothe yourself in white, a sign of purity. Prepare a quiet, sacred space with a single candle at the height of your heart. Sit in silence until all distractions dissolve, until only sincerity remains. Speak your vow aloud, not words borrowed from others, but the deepest renunciations of your ego and the clearest offering of your life to serve healing. Then remain in silence, allowing the transformation to seep into the roots of your being. He warned, "This vow is not an event, but a life." From that night forward, each act of healing must be prefaced by remembrance. It is not I who heal, but the light working through me. Pride must die anew every day. The temptation to take credit will return like a thief, but the pact demands humility, as constant as breath. Paracelsus declared, "The true physician is not a master of disease, but a servant of harmony. He does not command light, he obeys it." Imagine for a moment, what would it mean to live as instrument rather than author? To release control, to bow to the intelligence that weaves galaxies and yet mends a broken cell with the same care? This is not weakness. It is strength unborrowed. It is the source of miracles. From this point, Paracelsus's path changed forever. He ceased chasing recognition, ceased battling opponents, ceased demanding that patients heal according to his will. He simply allowed. And healings multiplied. Not because his knowledge grew sharper, but because his surrender grew deeper. This is the sixth confession. To heal truly, you must vanish into light. But there is more. For even light speaks in language, and its favorite language is music. Every organ hums a note. Every soul carries a song. When disharmony strikes, illness follows. In the next revelation, Paracelsus unveils the medicine of vibration, the hidden music of the soul that can retune even the most broken instrument. Every organ has a voice. Every cell hums a note. Together they weave the hidden symphony we call life. When all is tuned, the body sings harmony. When discord creeps in, disease is nothing more than music fallen out of key. Paracelsus called it the musica corporis, the music of the body. He insisted that illness is not silence but distortion, a dissonant chord that demands resolution. And just as a lute can be tuned, so too can the human soul. He first glimpsed this mystery in a girl of 16, born mute. No physician could coax a word from her throat, no charm could awaken her tongue. Yet Paracelsus noticed something strange. Whenever a shepherd outside played his reed flute, her body softened, her eyes brightened, and for a moment her lips trembled as if echoing an invisible sound. Intrigued, he brought instruments into his chamber. Bells, strings, pipes. He asked her family to strike each one while he watched her breath. To the clang of metal she stiffened. To the low hum of the lute she grew still. But to the pure, high tone of a wooden flute, her chest expanded and her throat quivered with life. Paracelsus took the flute himself and played a slow, repeating note. Hours passed, but she listened as though the sound was water quenching a desert. On the third day, she spoke her first word. Not a cry, not a groan, but a whisper of her own name. From this, Paracelsus wrote, "Every soul has a pitch. Find it and you will find the gate of healing. The ancients had intuited this. Pythagoras spoke of the musica universalis, the harmony of the spheres. The Hebrew psalmists sang of healing through lyre and voice. In temples of Egypt, chants in precise tones echoed through stone halls to realign the body. Paracelsus gathered these threads and wove them into practice, sound as medicine. He catalogued which tones seemed to touch which organs. The chest responded to low vibrations, the stomach to deeper drones, the head to higher notes. Though his system was imperfect, his insight was clear. The body is an instrument, and sickness is a string pulled out of tune. He prescribed rituals of sound. For the weary heart, chant a steady tone, deep, slow, like the toll of a bell. For the anxious mind, sing a rising note that resolves downward, teaching the body to release. For the weak lungs, play the flute or whistle, breathing life into the sound until the breath itself remembers joy. For the whole soul, enter silence after music, allowing the resonance to settle like dew. Modern science, centuries later, rediscovers fragments of this truth. Music therapy for trauma, ultrasound for tissues, cymatics revealing patterns in water shaped by sound. Yet Paracelsus would remind us, these are but shadows of a deeper power. The true cure lies not in decibels or frequencies, but in intention. The sound is the vessel. Love is the current it carries. He warned his students, do not play as performers, play as servants. If your heart is impure, your music will be empty. But if your heart is aflame with compassion, one note may do more than 1,000 medicines. Pause, listener. Consider the music that surrounds you each day, the voices you hear, the tones you invite into your home, the rhythm of your own speech. Do they tune your soul or fracture it? What would change if you treated every sound as medicine, every word as vibration shaping the architecture of your being? This is the 7th confession. The soul heals through harmony. Restore the song, and the flesh will follow. And yet, Paracelsus discovered an even greater paradox. The most powerful sound is not sound at all, but silence. In the next secret, he journeys into caves and cloisters to reveal how silence itself becomes the physician of physicians. There is a sound older than music, deeper than words, more healing than any chant. It is the sound of silence, the vast, unbroken stillness where creation itself takes root. Paracelsus called it the curative silence, the womb of all miracles. He did not discover it in a library or a cathedral, but in exile, hiding in the caves of the Carpathians. There, hunted and alone, he had no instruments, no herbs, no companions, only his own breath, his own restless mind, and the relentless echo of silence. At first it was torment. His thoughts screamed louder than any crowd, resentment for those who had banished him, fear of death, regrets too heavy to carry. The silence seemed like a cruel mirror reflecting his chaos. But as days passed, something began to change. The storm within slowly lost its fury. Between thoughts, gaps appeared, brief, crystalline moments of nothingness. And in that nothingness, healing began. He wrote, "In the silence, I felt surgeons unseen working in my flesh. Pains dissolved, old wounds softened, a light spread through marrow and mind. I understood then, noise is the chain, silence is the key." Modern science hints at this truth. In deep states of meditation, the body releases chemicals of restoration. The nervous system recalibrates, cells repair themselves more efficiently. But Paracelsus experienced it long before any laboratory. He witnessed silence knitting together his very being. He returned to his practice with a new prescription. To patients weary of endless remedies, he offered not potions, but stillness. An hour each dawn to sit in absolute quiet. No prayers, no mantras, no words, just presence. Many resisted at first, restless and impatient, but those who endured began to change. A woman with chronic pain reported that in silence her suffering became a teacher, not a tyrant, and soon her body released its agony. A soldier haunted by visions of war found that the silence washed his mind like a river, until he could sleep peacefully for the first time in years. Silence, Paracelsus taught, is not emptiness but fullness. It is the chamber where the soul hears its original voice, where the body remembers its perfect design, where God, uninvited, whispers anyway. He instructed, "Begin with 10 minutes at dawn. Sit where the world is hushed. Do not fight thoughts, let them pass like birds across the sky. Attend instead to the space between them, the pause beneath the noise. That pause is the medicine. That pause is eternity." And he warned, "Do not mistake silence for void. It is alive, intelligent, healing. In true silence, the soul communes with forces greater than itself." Ask yourself, dear listener, when was the last time you allowed silence to embrace you fully? No distractions, no music, no screens, no speech, just the unshakable presence of being. What might your body mend? What burden might lift if you surrendered to that sacred quiet? This is the 8th confession. Silence heals where words fail. But Paracelsus was not finished. Out of silence, he discovered another power, the creative vision of the mind itself, capable of shaping flesh and destiny. What he called the inner journey. And it is this 9th secret that awaits you. Close your eyes and imagine stepping into the hidden cathedral within your own body. The pillars are your bones, the windows your eyes, the altar your heart. This cathedral is always open, always radiant, but most walk past without entering. Paracelsus called this passage the inner journey, the sacred act of healing through imagination. He discovered it in Prague, in the chamber of a nobleman struck down by paralysis of the arm. The wound was physical, yes, but deeper still was the despair carved into the man's soul. No tincture or poultice could restore what had been lost. So Paracelsus tried something audacious. He told the man, "Do not wait for medicine to repair you. Travel instead into your own temple." Every day, the nobleman sat in silence, guided to envision his arm whole, not broken, not weak, but strong, fluid, alive. He imagined fingers grasping a quill, muscles flexing with ease, nerves sparkling with light. At first it felt foolish, like pretending, but Paracelsus urged him to believe as if it were already true. Weeks passed, a twitch, a flicker of movement. Then sensation returned like the dawn after a long night. Within months, the arm lived again, stronger than before. Paracelsus had witnessed not magic, but the body answering the script of the mind. He wrote, "The imagination is not fantasy. It is the architect of the flesh. What the soul envisions with purity, the body cannot resist becoming." Centuries later, science whispers the same. Athletes rehearse victories in the theater of the mind, and the body responds. Patients who visualize healing recover faster. Neurons fire as though the imagined act were real. Yet Paracelsus knew it as living truth. The inner image holds the seed of transformation. He taught a simple but profound method. Enter silence first, calming the noise of thought. Choose the part of the body in need. See it not in sickness, but in perfection, clear, strong, radiant with light. Feel gratitude, not desire, not "I want this," but "I thank you for what already is." Repeat morning and night, until the image feels more real than the wound, and above all, purity of heart. He warned that imagination wielded with greed or malice twists into poison. But imagination coupled with love and faith becomes divine medicine. Pause, listener. What do you imagine when you think of yourself? Do you see brokenness, limits, frailty? Or do you dare to picture the radiant whole that has always lived within you? Paracelsus insists, the body bends to the vision of the soul. This is the ninth confession. The mind, when aligned with love, restores the flesh. Yet with healing comes danger, for the luminous soul attracts not only light, but shadow, and Paracelsus, ever pursued by forces of suppression, knew the necessity of one more secret, a mantle of protection to shield the healer's fire. That, he said, is the next threshold. Imagine carrying a flame through a storm. However bright, however sacred, the flame will not survive unless it is shielded. Paracelsus knew this truth not only in theory, but in bitter experience. For when he healed, when he lit the hidden fire in others, unseen winds tried to snuff it out. He called this secret the protective mantle, the invisible armor of the soul. The lesson arrived in a desolate village, struck by a strange affliction. Bodies weakened, spirits dimmed, and though his remedies brought temporary relief, the illness always returned. At night, he felt a weight pressing on his chest, whispers that were not his own. He recognized them as no ordinary disease, but as parasitic forces feeding on despair. One evening, in deep meditation, he described seeing tendrils of shadow reaching for his light. Fear nearly consumed him, until he remembered silence. He stilled his breath and envisioned himself wrapped in golden radiance, descending from the highest heavens. The shadows recoiled instantly, powerless against the light of pure intent. Thus was born his protective mantle. He taught his disciples, the healer who shines must also shield. Without armor, compassion bleeds into exhaustion, and light becomes a feast for the dark. The practice was simple, yet profound. Each morning, after silence, visualize a sphere of light enveloping your body. Let it expand 3 meters in every direction, shimmering like sunlight on water. Declare, only what is born of love may enter. All else returns to its source. With this, Paracelsus found his energy no longer drained. Patients healed more swiftly, and he remained untouchable by despair that once clung to him. Modern mystics and psychologists echo the same principle. Boundaries protect vitality. Empaths and healers who give without shield burn out. Those who honor protection channel light for decades. Even science, in its own way, confirms it. Stress, negativity, and toxic environments weaken the immune system, while positive intention strengthens resilience. But Paracelsus added a warning. Never build the mantle from fear. Fear hardens into walls that imprison. Build it from compassion, from love so radiant that darker currents simply cannot coexist. True protection is not a fortress, but a filter, allowing what uplifts while returning what corrupts. Pause, seeker. How do you guard your own flame? Do you walk through life naked to every influence, every voice, every wound of others? Or do you honor your light enough to shield it? For the healer, protection is not selfish. It is sacred responsibility. This is the 10th confession. To heal, one must guard the soul's fire. And yet beyond shields and rituals lies something higher still, communion with the source itself, prayer beyond words, a union so intimate that no danger can breach it. Paracelsus called it the wordless prayer, the 11th threshold. There comes a moment when every word, every chant, every ritual feels insufficient. The tongue falters, the mind runs dry, yet the heart still longs to speak to the infinite. Paracelsus named this state the prayer without words, a communion so pure that silence itself becomes language. He discovered it not in triumph, but in exhaustion. Years of exile had broken his body. Betrayals had scarred his spirit. Retreating to the mountains of Salzburg, he tried every practice he knew. Chants, meditations, invocations, but none eased the wound in his heart. So one dawn, he ceased all effort. He sat before the rising sun, weary, wordless, stripped of formula and technique. What happened then, he called the supreme healing. In that naked stillness, his soul seemed to dissolve into the vastness around him. No requests, no bargains, no demands, only presence. And in that presence, peace descended, a peace deeper than rest, more healing than medicine. He realized that God, the source, the great mystery, does not require words to hear. The language of the pure heart is enough. Paracelsus wrote, "I discovered that true prayer is not asking but becoming. The soul becomes a listening vessel, and the divine fills it with what is most needed, whether health, clarity, or love." His disciples noted a change. From that time onward, when he touched a patient, cures unfolded without strain. When he looked into their eyes, they felt seen not by him, but by a presence flowing through him. He had become, in his own phrase, a hollow flute through which the breath of God played. The practice he left behind is simple, yet profound. Sit in silence at dawn or dusk. Release all petitions, even the desire for healing. Let the breath flow naturally, as if carried by a greater rhythm. Rest in openness, like a child in its mother's arms. When peace arises, do not cling to it, simply let it expand. Over time, this wordless communion transforms perception. Problems once heavy shrink into small ripples on an infinite sea. The heart softens, intuition sharpens, and healing flows not from effort, but from alignment with what already is. Modern mystics and contemplatives know this well. Christian hesychasts, Sufi dervishes, Zen monks, all echo the same truth. When words cease, communion begins. Science, too, hints at it. Studies of contemplative silence reveal lowered stress, increased empathy, and profound shifts in brain patterns toward peace. Pause now, listener. When was the last time you allowed yourself to simply be, without asking, without naming, without striving? What if the deepest medicine was not something you said, but something you allowed? This is the 11th confession. The purest prayer speaks without words. But even this was not Paracelsus's final revelation. Beyond silence, beyond wordless communion, lies the return to our original nature, the restitution. The 12th and ultimate secret, where healing is no longer technique, but remembrance of who we truly are. At the end of every pilgrimage, the traveler realizes what mystics have whispered through the ages. The treasure was never far away. Paracelsus called this final threshold the restitution, the return to wholeness, the remembrance that we were never truly broken. He described it in the final winter of his life. Old, frail, hunted by the shadows of the Inquisition, he sat by a narrow window in a monastery cell. Yet his writings from those last days shine not with despair, but with luminous serenity. He had seen through the illusion. Disease, he said, is not an enemy, but an amnesia, a forgetting of our eternal design. Healing, therefore, is not invention, not even discovery, but remembrance. He wrote, "Every cure I ever gave was but a mirror, reminding the soul of its perfection. The flesh does not heal, it remembers. The light does not arrive, it awakens." In this final teaching, Paracelsus urged his disciples to go beyond technique. The body as mirror, the inner journey, the silence, the wordless prayer. All these were tools, but only tools. Their true purpose was to lead the seeker back to the recognition: we are already whole. The practice he left for the last stage of the path was startling in its simplicity. When facing illness, pain, or despair, do not say, "I must heal." Instead, declare inwardly, "I am remembering my wholeness." When you meet another in suffering, do not see them as broken, but as radiant beings veiled by clouds of forgetting. Offer presence, compassion, and vision, not as correction, but as reminder. He compared it to the sculptor who sees the statue already within the marble. The chisel does not create beauty, it reveals it. Likewise, the healer does not impose wholeness, but uncovers it until the soul stands revealed in its original splendor. Modern voices echo this. Psychologists speak of the body's self-organizing intelligence, mystics of divine remembrance, scientists of cellular repair encoded in our very DNA. Paracelsus saw it all as one truth. The spark of perfection never leaves us, even when buried under pain. And so he ended his manuscript with words not of warning, but of blessing. Beloved seeker, you are the secret. The flame you sought in books and masters was burning in your chest all along. Guard it, nourish it, share it, but above all, remember it. Pause now, listener. Imagine that every wound in you, every sorrow, every scar, is not proof of your brokenness but a veil. Beneath it burns the unquenchable light of your being. What might change if you lived not to fix yourself, but to remember yourself? This is the 12th and final confession. Healing is remembrance. With it, the circle closes. The seeker and the sought are revealed as one. The path returns to its beginning, and the beginning is light. Thus ends the forbidden manuscript of Paracelsus. Carry it not as burden, but as seed. For the greatest miracle is not the one you read about, but the one you will live.